Let's go
Okay.
for it.
A note to the reader. At the dawn of the millennium, what's the hottest item on the intellectual front? An item that commands the interest of academia as well as intellectual fashion magazines such as Atlantic Monthly and The New Yorker, that captures public interest as well as professorial, that promises finally to reveal long hidden secrets of the human condition, whose terms those in the know can quickly name, if not explain, and thus beam with this searingly hot new idea. Some would say evolutionary psychology, which is the application of evolutionary principles to the study of human behavior. You know, human males are sexually profligate and females are nest builders because a million years of natural selection have made us so. Evolutionary psychology has indeed become a very hot item, largely because it has managed to displace 3 decades of postmodernism, which previously was the mega hip item but is now met with a slow yawn and casual scorn. Postmodernism is so yesterday, and isn't that ironic?
Well, that was. Um,
What?
yeah, I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, obviously, for people who have been thinking about postmodernism for a long time, it's
Yeah.
yeah, but
It's actually
it's
so now.
yeah, it's very much now.
I mean, when was this written? I don't know. Shall I continue?
Please.
Postmodernism had built its huge band of followers largely on its capacity to deconstruct everybody else's ideas, leaving the wielder of this postmodernist demolition as the king or queen of the academic hill. Evolutionary psychology managed to pull the rug out from under the rug pullers, and it did so by showing that evolutionary principles give much more interesting and compelling explanations of human behavior than the standard postmodern claim that all behavior is culturally relative and socially constructed. Evolutionary psychology made it clear that there are indeed universals in the human condition, that evolution can be denied only by embracing incoherence, and that most of all, postmodernism just wasn't any fun anymore.
Yeah, well, some people are certainly playing with it and
Oh,
having fun.
yeah. Evolutionary psychology is actually a branch of a radically new understanding of evolution itself. The previous neo Darwinian synthesis saw evolution as the result of random genetic mutations, the more favorable of which, in terms of survival value, are carried forward by natural selection. This theory always left many people with a deeply uncomfortable feeling. How could all of the extraordinary vitality and diversity of life come from a universe that is supposed to be governed solely by the laws of physics, laws that bluntly assert that the universe is running down? The second law of thermodynamics tells us that in the real world, disorder always increases. Yet simple observation tells us that in the real world, life creates order everywhere. The universe is winding up, not down. The revolutionary new understanding found in chaos and complexity theories maintains that the physical universe actually has an inherent tendency to create order, just as when water chaotically washing down the drain in your bathroom sink suddenly organizes itself into a beautiful swirling whirlpool. Biological life itself is a series of swirling whirlpools, creating order out of chaos at every turn, and these new and more highly ordered structures are carried forward by various selection processes operating at all levels, from physical to cultural. In the human domain, this shows up in exactly the behavior studied by the new evolutionary psychology, a very hot topic, understandably. Still, as hot as evolutionary psychology is, it's not the hottest. Starting seriously in the early 1980s and building to something of a crescendo in the late 1990s, the world of physics began to hum with rumors of a theory of everything, a model that would unite all the known laws of the universe into one all embracing theory that would literally explain everything in existence. The very hand of God could be seen in its formulas. Some whispered. The veil had been lifted from the face of the ultimate mystery, others said. The final answer was at hand, the hushed consensus hinted. Known as string theory, or more accurately M theory, it promises to unite all of the known models of physics, covering electromagnetism, nuclear forces, and gravity, into one all-encompassing supermodel. The fundamental units of this supermodel are known as strings, or one-dimensional vibrating chords, and from the various types of notes that these fundamental strings play, one can derive every known particle and force in the cosmos. M theory, the M is said to stand for everything from matrix to membrane to mystery to mother, as in mother of all theories, is indeed an exciting and promising model, and should it eventually prove sound, it has yet to have any extensive physical corroboration. It would indeed be one of the most profound scientific discoveries of all time. And that is why, for those in the know, string theory, or M theory, is the hottest of the hot intellectual stories, an explosively revolutionary supermodel that pushes even evolutionary psychology into the mundane corner of the merely interesting. M theory has certainly got intellectuals thinking, that is, thinking differently. What would it mean if there were a theory that explained everything? And just what does everything actually mean anyway? Would this new theory in physics explain, say, the meaning of human poetry, or how economics works, or the stages of psychosexual development? Can this new physics explain the currents of ecosystems, or the dynamics of history, or why human wars are so terribly common? In the interiors of quarks, it is said, there are vibrating strings, and these strings are the fundamental units of everything. Well, if so, it is a strange everything, pale and anemic and alien to the richness of the world that daily presents itself to you and me. Clearly, strings are an important part of a larger world, fundamental to it, but not that significant, it seems. You and I already know that strings, should they exist, are only a tiny part of the picture, and we know this every time we look around, listen to Bach, make love, are caught transfixed at the sharp crack of thunder, sit rapturous at sunset, contemplate a radiant world that seems made of something so much more than microscopic, one-dimensional, tiny rubber bands. The Greeks had a beautiful word, cosmos, with a capital K, which means the patterned whole of existence, including the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual realms. Ultimate reality was not merely the cosmos with a lowercase c, or the physical dimension, but the capital K cosmos, or the physical and emotional and mental and spiritual dimensions altogether. Not just matter, lifeless and insentient, but the living totality of matter, body, mind, soul, and spirit, the cosmos. Now there is a real theory of everything, but us poor moderns have reduced the cosmos to the little c cosmos. We have reduced matter and body and mind and soul and spirit to nothing but matter alone, and this drab and dreary world of scientific materialism, we are lulled into the notion that a theory uniting the physical dimension is actually a theory of everything. The new physics, it is said, actually shows us the mind of God. Well, perhaps, but only when God is thinking about dirt. So without in any way denying the importance of a unified physics, let us also ask, can we have a theory not merely of the cosmos, lowercase c, but of the capital K cosmos? Can there be a genuine theory of everything? Does it even make sense to ask this question? And where would we begin? An integral vision, or a genuine theory of everything, attempts to include matter, body, mind, soul, and spirit as they appear in self, culture, and nature. A vision that attempts to be comprehensive, balanced, inclusive. A vision that therefore embraces science, art, and morals, that equally includes disciplines from physics to spirituality, biology to aesthetics, sociology to contemplative prayer, that shows up in integral politics, integral medicine, integral business, integral spirituality. This book is a brief overview of a theory of everything. All such attempts, of course, are marked by the many ways in which they fail. The many ways in which they fall short, make unwarranted generalizations, drive specialists insane, and generally fail to achieve their stated aim of holistic embrace. It's not just that the task is beyond any one human mind, it's that the task itself is inherently undoable. Knowledge expands faster than ways to categorize it. The holistic quest is an ever-receding dream, a horizon that constantly retreats as we approach it, a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow that we will never reach. So why even attempt the impossible? Because I believe a little bit of wholeness is better than none at all, and an integral vision offers considerably more wholeness than the slice and dice alternatives. We can be more whole or less whole, more fragmented or less fragmented, more alienated or less alienated, and an integral vision invites us to be a little more whole, a little less fragmented in our work, our lives, our destiny. There are immediate benefits, as you will see in the following pages. The first 4 chapters introduce the theory of everything, and the last 3 outline its relevance in the real world, where we will discuss integral politics, integral business, integral education, integral medicine, and integral spirituality, as they are already finding widespread and enthusiastic applications. The last chapter discusses integral transformative practice, or the ways in which an integral approach to psychological and spiritual transformation can be used in your own case if you so desire. The endnotes are for advanced students or for a second reading. And in the last chapter, I will give recommended readings for those who would like to further pursue the integral vision and a theory of everything. Please use the ideas in the following pages as simple suggestions. Simple. See if they make sense to you. See if you can improve them. See in any event if they help you bring forth your own integral ideas and aspirations. I once had a professor who defined a good theory as one that lasts long enough to get you to a better one. The same is true for a good theory of everything. It is not a fixed or final theory, simply one that has served its purpose if it helps you get to a better one. And in the meantime, there is the wonder and the glory of the search itself, drenched in the radiance of being from the start, and always already completed before it even begins. Ken Wilber, Boulder, Colorado, Spring 2000. Do you want to start the first chapter?
Sure. All right, so chapter 1, The Amazing Spiral.
That's where we get to the good stuff.
We live in I'm going to have a hard time with this, I think. We live in an extraordinary time. All of the world's cultures, past and present, are, to some degree, available to us, either in historical records or as living entities. In the history of the planet Earth, this has never happened before. It seems hard to imagine, but for humanity's entire stay on this planet, for some million years up to the present, a person was born into a culture that knew virtually nothing about any other. You were, for example, born a Chinese, raised a Chinese, married Chinese, and followed a Chinese religion, often living in the same hut for your entire life, on a spot of land that your ancestors settled for centuries. From isolated tribes and bands to small farming villages to ancient nations to conquering feudal empires to international corporate states to global village, the extraordinary growth toward an integral village that seems humanity's destiny. So it is that the leading edge of consciousness, evolution, stands today on the brink of an integral millennium, or at least the possibility of an integral millennium, where the sum total of extant human knowledge, wisdom, and technology is available to all. And sooner or later, we will have, of course, a theory of everything to explain it all. But as we will see, there are several obstacles to that integral understanding, even in the most developed populations. Moreover, there is the more typical or average mode of consciousness, which is far from integral anything, and is in desperate need of its own tending. Both of those pressing issues, the integral vision as it relates to the most developed and the modestly developed populations, are some of the central topics of this book, even if we have a theory of everything that charitably embraces all and unduly marginalizes none. Will it really benefit all peoples? And how can we help to ensure that it does? In short, what is the status of the integral vision in today's world, both in the cultural elite and in the world at large? Let's start with the leading edge and the many obstacles to an integral vision in our cultural elite. Yes, let's start there. Remember, this is speaking 20 years ago.
Yeah, I know, right?
Fragmentation at the leading edge. So,
Which would be green right now.
integral. The word means to integrate, to bring together, to join, to link, to embrace. Not in the sense of uniformity, and not in the sense of ironing out all of the wonderful differences, colors, zigs and zags of a rainbow-hued humanity, but in the sense of unity and diversity, shared commonalities, along with our wonderful differences. And not just in humanity, but in the cosmos at large, finding a more comprehensive view, a theory of everything, that makes legitimate room for art, morals, science, and religion, and doesn't merely attempt to reduce all of them to one's favorite slice of the cosmic pie. And of course, if we succeed in developing a truly holistic or integral view of reality, then we will also develop a new type of critical theory, that is, a theory that is critical of the present state of affairs in light of a more encompassing and desirable state, both in the individual and the culture at large. The integral paradigm will inherently be critical of those approaches that are, by comparison, partial, narrow, shallow, less encompassing, less integrative. We will be exploring this integral vision, this theory of everything, in the following pages, but it is definitely not a final view or a fixed view or the only view, just a view that attempts to honor and include as much research as possible from the largest number of disciplines in a coherent fashion, which is one definition of an integral or more comprehensive view of the cosmos. Yet the very attempt itself does raise the interesting question: can a truly integral vision exist in today's climate of culture wars, identity politics, a million new and conflicting paradigms, deconstructive postmodernism, nihilism, pluralistic relativism, and the politics of self? Can a theory of everything even be recognized, let alone accepted in such a cultural state? Aren't the cultural elite themselves in as fragmented and rancorous a state as ever? Perhaps the masses of humanity are bent on tribal warfare and ethnocentric cleansing. But what if the cultural elite itself is likewise so inclined? We are talking, in other words, about the leading edge of consciousness evolution itself, and whether even the leading edge is truly ready for an integral vision. In the end, we will find, I believe, that there is some very good news in all this. But first, a little bit of what I see as the bad news. Boomeritis.
Do you want me to? Are you good?
No, I gotcha. This is hilarious because boomeritis, like,
He's got
okay,
a book.
boomer. Well, there's
Yeah.
a whole book called Boomeritis, but
Right.
but
But he's-
the term, like the meme, okay, boomer,
Yeah.
like that just blew up,
Yeah.
right?
Pretty recently.
The baby boomer generation has, like any generation, its strengths and weaknesses. Its strengths include an extraordinary vitality, creativity, and idealism, plus a willingness to experiment with new ideas beyond traditional values. Some social observers have seen in the boomers an awakening generation, evidenced by an extraordinary creativity in everything from music to computer technology, political action to lifestyles, ecology or ecological sensitivity, and civil rights. I believe there is much truth and goodness in those endeavors, to the boomers' considerable credit. Boomer weaknesses, most critics agree, include an unusual dose of self-absorption and narcissism, so much so that most people, boomers included, simply nod their heads in acknowledgement when the phrase "the me generation" is mentioned. Thus it seems that my generation, Ken Wilber is a boomer, legit, is an extraordinary mixture of greatness and narcissism, and that strange amalgam has infected almost everything we do. We don't seem content to simply have a fine new idea. We must have the new paradigm that will herald one of the greatest transformations in the history of the world. We don't really want to just recycle bottles and paper. We need to see ourselves dramatically saving the planet and saving Gaia and resurrecting the goddess that previous generations had brutally repressed, but we will finally liberate. This is one of the reasons. His whole analysis of the Boomer generation is why I kind of envision the modern, like, the postmodern left as kind of like LARPing the 60s.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, civil rights. It's like, yeah, I mean, sure. Like,
Yeah.
but nobody is like against civil rights now.
Right,
It's
right.
it's a silly thing. It's like, it's like, I don't know. It does. It feels like live action role playing the 60s.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's the 60s again. We're all wearing tie dye and
Yeah.
running around the street
Well,
talking about love.
Or black.
Yeah, well, or black, but we won't talk about them yet.
Yeah.
I mean, there was enough of that in the 60s too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh,
there
were
was
plenty of people
There were
making bombs
terrorists. There was the
and-
Weather Underground,
Yeah.
right? Who,
Yeah.
by the way, went on to basically direct our public education system. But
That's right. I remember you mentioning that.
Bill Ayers. Anyway,
What'd you do?
we don't see finally liberate the goddess, right? We aren't able to tend our garden. We aren't able to just tend our garden. We must be transfiguring the face of the planet in the most astonishing global awakening history has ever seen. We seem to need to see ourselves as the vanguard of something unprecedented in all of history, the extraordinary wonder of being us. Well, it can be pretty funny if you think about it, and I truly don't mean any of this in a harsh way. Each generation has its foibles. This appears to be ours, at least to some degree. But I believe few of my generation escape this narcissistic mood. Many social critics have agreed, and not just in such penetrating works as Lash's The Culture of Narcissism, Restak's Self-Seekers, Bella's Habits of the Heart, and Stern's Me, the Narcissistic American. Surveying the present state of cultural studies, even in American universities, Professor Frank Lentricia, writing in Lingua Franca, The Review of Academic Life, concluded, "It is impossible, this much is clear, to exaggerate the heroic self-inflation of academic, literary, and cultural criticism." Which is a beautiful sentence. I'll say it one more time.
Yeah.
It is impossible, this much is clear, to exaggerate the heroic self-inflation of academic, literary, and cultural criticism.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, ouch. But it's true that if you peruse books on cultural studies, alternative spirituality, the new paradigm, and great transformation that will occur if the world simply listens to the author and his or her revolutionary ideas, sooner or later this heroic self-inflation starts to get to you. Curious as to what all the self-inflation might actually mean, I researched and wrote a book about this strange affliction that seems to shadow my generation, this odd mixture of remarkably high cognitive capacity and wonderfully creative intelligence coupled with an unusual dose of emotional narcissism. Of course, as I said, all previous generations had their own imperfections aplenty. I am by no means picking on boomers. It's just that awakening generations often have a particularly intense downside, simply because they are so intense in general. And for boomers, it appears to be a bit of self-inflation, a love affair avec moi. Or avec soi, he says, along the lines of Oscar Levant's quip to Gershwin, "Tell me, George, if you had to do it all over again, would you still fall in love with yourself?" I called the book Boomeritis. It chronicled dozens of areas and disciplines where an important but partial truth was blown all out of proportion by an overestimation of the power and importance of the self. In a moment, I will briefly outline its general conclusions, only because, as I said, this relates directly to an integral vision and its reception in today's world. The idea is simple enough. The culture of narcissism is antithetical to an integral culture, because narcissists, isolated selves, strenuously resist communion. And thus, the point remains, is the world ready for integral anything? If not, what is preventing it? So, let's talk about the waves of existence.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. My back back hurts.
Or about the fact that his is not the only narcissistic generation. I mean, I think it's continued forth, and which is why all these mostly young people right now feel like they need to do what they're doing, rioting, looting, taking down statues. They also feel like this is like the what they need to be doing to
change the world.
And like, if not them, then who, and so.
And to some extent that's true, right? But like at least in my mind, the degree to which who I think it was James Lindsay recently. Maybe it wasn't. Might have been James Lindsay recently who said something along the lines of like, it's not that the goalposts are moving with critical theory. It's that the goalposts don't exist. There's no end goal.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't have goalposts if there's no goal at all. And you know what I mean? Like, it's the dissolution of everything.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Like, isn't that a goal in and of itself to like for the downfall of Western civilization? It
can be, but I think that to be fair, I think that it's mostly subconscious and unarticulated. Kind of. You call it, subconscious. Just drives, kind of anger and envy and. If you saw
self-righteousness.
Well, yeah, there's some self-righteousness too, But I mean, if you see a cop kneeling on George Floyd's neck for damn near 9 minutes and the man dies and people are standing around yelling, "Hey, don't do this!" and you know what I mean? You see this, so it's reasonable to be angry.
Yeah, of course.
It's weird though because we live in this new landscape of social media where it's kind of like, I think evolutionarily speaking, my guess would be that we're pretty well wired to manage the world as if the things that we see are in our immediate purview, right? So because for most of our evolutionary history, like there was a thing there and it was a threat, so you had to do something about it, right?
Now we're seeing everything that's happening all over the place.
Now we see all of the bad things, right? Because everyone's got a phone, everyone posts it online.
And that's mostly what the news wants to show us. Cause
that's where we want to see, because it's a threat, right? We want to know what the threats are. So we see the threat, and the threat is in Minneapolis. Yeah. It's this terrible cop in Minneapolis, right? Right. Well, yes, of course they would. But I would argue that that's the wrong way of looking at it. That what's actually happening is we're seeing something and we're not like really evolved to see things that happen on the other side of the world. We're not really evolved to the point where we can manage knowing all the bad things that are happening in the world all the time. Yeah. 'Cause like that's just not,
it's too much.
It's too much, right? Like that's not, and this goes kind of in the line of Jordan Peterson's message, and I think part of why it was so popular is the idea of clean up your room, right? It's like focus on what's going on in your immediate environment, right? Because the fact that everything that's happening in the world is going to drive you crazy, and we're wired to think that the things we see are happening, right now. Yeah. And the truth is, they're happening extremely rarely. Yeah. But extremely rarely on a planet of 9 billion people, almost 8 billion people, whatever, is if you can see all of it,
right?
It's a lot.
It seems like too much.
So economies of scale play into so.
Shall we continue?
Let's talk about waves of existence.
Okay.
The waves of existence. Developmental psychology is the study of the growth and development of the mind, the study of interior development and consciousness evolution. So let us ask, can developmental psychology shed any light on this problem? One of the striking things about the present state of developmental studies is how similar, in broad outline, most of its models are. Indeed, in Integral Psychology, a book he wrote, I assembled the conclusions of over 100 different researchers, and, as one of them summarized the situation, the stage sequences of all these theorists can be aligned across a common developmental space. The harmony of alignment shown suggests a possible reconciliation of these theories. From Claire Graves to Abraham Maslow to Deidre Kramer to Jan Sinnott, Jürgen Habermas, who I didn't know he was a developmental psychologist, but
I've heard the name before.
yeah, to Cheryl Armon, Kurt Fisher, Jenny Wade, Robin Keegan, Susan Cook Gruder, there emerges a remarkably consistent story of the evolution of consciousness. Of course, there are dozens of disagreements and hundreds of conflicting details, but they all tell a generally similar tale of the growth and development of the mind as a series of unfolding stages or waves. Few of these developmental schemes are the rigid, linear, clunk and grind models portrayed by their critics. Development is not a linear ladder, but a fluid and flowing affair, with spirals and swirls, streams and waves, and what appear to be an almost infinite number of multiple modalities. Most of today's sophisticated developmental theories take all of that into account, and more important, back it with substantial research. Let me give one of them as an example. The model is called spiral dynamics. Based on the pioneering work of Claire Graves, Graves proposed a profound and elegant system of human development which subsequent research has validated and refined, not refuted. Briefly, what I'm proposing is that the psychology of the mature human being is an unfolding, emergent, oscillating, spiraling process marked by progressive subordination of older, lower-order behavior to newer, higher-order systems as an individual's existential problems change. Each successive stage, wave, or level of existence is a state through which people pass on their way to other states of being. When the human is centralized in one state of existence, he or she has a psychology which is particular to that state. His or her feelings, motivations, ethics and values, biochemistry, degree of neurological activation, learning system, belief system, conception of mental health, ideas as to what mental illness is and how it should be treated, conceptions of and preferences for management, education, economics, and political theory and practice are all appropriate to that state. That was a quote from Graves.
Okay.
It's a long quote, but Graves outlined around 8 major levels or waves of human existence, as he called them, as we will see in a moment. But it should be remembered that virtually all of these stage conceptions, from Abraham Maslow to Jane Levinger to Robert Keegan to Claire Graves, are based on extensive amounts of research and data. These are not simply conceptual ideas and pet theories, but are grounded at every point in a considerable amount of carefully checked evidence. Many of the stage models, in fact, have been carefully checked in first, second, and third world countries. The same is true with Graves's model to date. It has been tested in more than 50,000 people from around the world. There have been no major exceptions found to the general scheme. Of course, this does not mean that any of these schemes gives the whole story, or even most of it. They are all simply partial snapshots of the great river of life, and they are all useful when looking at the river from that particular angle. This does not prevent other pictures from being equally useful, nor does it mean that these pictures cannot be refined with further study. What it does mean is that any attempt to understand humanity's struggle to reach an integral embrace ought to take these studies into account. So, I've been thinking about one of the things that most people, I shouldn't say, well, yeah, a lot of people that I've noticed this weird kind of thing in discussions with people online, where the idea of development of humans and of cultures and of people, society and whatever, the idea of, well, for one, the postmodernists think that development is they kind of think that they don't think of development as actual progress. They think of it as like cancer or something. Like something's just malignantly growing in some direction randomly for no reason. Because there's no better or worse, right? This is like there's no fundamental truth, so it's just a different thing, right? Like it's like if I start babbling incoherently for 10 minutes and end up talking about matches and rollerblades or something, it's like, well, that was a progression. It's like, well, that's not
really.
That's not progress, right?
Right.
It's but like the idea is that all development is just development into something else, not something better or more refined or different, or closer to true or more prosperous, or it's like there it's all like, anyway. So that's kind of fundamental to their worldview, is that this idea that there's no true progress, right? That even if there was, we wouldn't know how to characterize it as being true, because we don't have access to truth. But I've noticed this in lots of other people too. This idea that like where and a lot of people see the slippery slope fallacy, like this idea that like if you see a problem and then you go, okay, well, that's going to lead to this problem. Is that they see this weird like downhill progression? They see that.
Yeah.
People see like, oh, well, the future is going to happen in these bad ways. But it's very hard for people to look at the future that will happen in these good ways.
Yeah.
Or to recognize that the future has been the past has been unfolding in some very good ways.
Right. Is that why they don't see the progress that like we've made since the 60s and the way of
and before, right?
Yeah.
And so there's kind of like this hopeless nihilism where it seems like people and they characterize their enemies as a specific way.
Yeah.
Right? Without any kind of like development to it, right? Unless that development is they've been tainted and like they've been brutalized by the institutions, and now they're going down the slippery slope, and eventually they're going to be demons, right?
Yeah.
like so, or they're just like this static thing, right? And that they're always this way, and that's just the way they are. You see this with, people say like, oh yeah, Trumpers they're just like this, or
right.
Those SJWs are just that they're like this static thing. That's just the way they are. And I think a lot of people are very partial to that idea because we try to be like as if we're a static thing all the time. We want to like pretend that we're like something specific.
Yeah. Like
I'm like this, not like that. We try to like solidify our identities and pretend that we're a real. Like I'm a real boy,
yeah.
But because anyway, I've noticed that like we have this weird absence of the idea of positive development throughout the discourse, like throughout all the political discourse. No one's ever saying like, oh, well, things get better.
Yeah.
It's like. Yeah, but like we basically almost totally ended starvation in the world.
Yeah. And aren't we like having the number of impoverished people every year? It's like it's having
it's dropping like a rock. Like the UN really thinks it's going to be gone like within our lifetimes. Actual grinding poverty. Yeah. Like not relative poverty, right?
Sure.
It's like here's the weird thing about we're getting totally off
on a tangent.
But like nobody's ever been in the history of humanity. Nobody's ever been as rich as Jeff Bezos is now, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So the fact that there are still people living on like $1 a day or less, right? When he's that, the gap between the two is going to continue to get bigger.
Yeah.
Right.
But the people that are at the lowest rungs are going to continue. They're going to continue,
right?
Up.
So like the idea that people who like are literally starving and don't have food, that's going to stop in our lifetime.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't care how much money Jeff Bezos has, as long as that happens.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I really hope that happens. So, I'm more interested in the progress on the small end than the gap between some guy who's got a
Yeah.
lot of money and people who don't.
Yeah,
Like,
and that always changes anyways. Like who knows who that'll be in like
yeah, it'll
just
be
a little
somebody
bit.
else.
I mean, like unless he continues with
Well,
Amazon,
it's
but I
gonna be
mean,
someone in India or China because the
probably.
markets are they're developing so quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, the market's there, and they've got so many people. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
India is 1.2 billion people by itself, and they've got a massively technologically, advanced society. Like they're deeply investing in technological advancement.
Yeah.
I really think that they're gonna. I mean, there's just
Well,
it's
who
incredible.
knows
And
what's
China
going to come
too. I
about
mean, they're
in the
gonna
next
be.
couple of years in the way of technology, like stuff that Elon Musk is talking
I
about.
know, right? Neural
Just,
net.
Just I don't know how much more of this I can.
Yeah, well,
do
we're only
my
on page
eyes.
7.
I know. I told you this was going to take a
Do
while.
you want to read
I can.
the Human Consciousness Project?
I will try. I shall say
Give it a shot.
because
Give it a shot. I'm gonna drink some water.
my eyes are getting a little bleary. But all right, the Human Consciousness Project. These studies, in fact, appear to be a crucial part of any genuine theory of everything. If we are going to include the physical, biological, psychological, and spiritual dimensions of existence, then this important research offers us a more generous overview of the many possibilities of the psychological dimension. In a sense, this research is the psychological correlate of the Human Genome Project, which involves the scientific mapping of all the genes in human DNA. Just so, this overall psychological research, this Human Consciousness Project, is a cross-cultural mapping of all of the states, structures, memes, types, levels, stages, and waves of human consciousness. This overall map, as we will see, then becomes the psychological component of a possible theory of everything, where it will be supplemented with findings from the physical, biological, cultural, and spiritual dimensions. And we will also see this psychological map will help us to understand some of the many obstacles that make it hard for individuals to appreciate a more integral vision of their own possibilities.
What?
And we will also see this psychological map will help us to understand some of the many obstacles that make it hard for individuals to appreciate a more integral vision of their own possibilities.
Okay. Got it.
We return then to Claire Graves' work, which has been carried forward and refined by Don Beck and Christopher Cohen in an approach they call spiral dynamics. Far from being mere armchair analysts, Beck and Cohen were participants in the discussions that led to the end of apartheid in South Africa. The principles of spiral dynamics have been fruitfully used to reorganize businesses, revitalize townships, overhaul education systems, and diffuse inner-city tensions. Spiral dynamics sees human development as proceeding through 8 general stages, which are also called memes. Meme is a word that is used a lot nowadays, more so now than recently.
Well, when he was writing it, he was talking about oh my goodness, Richard Dawkins.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's used a lot nowadays with many different and conflicting meanings, and many critics say the word has no meaning at all. But for spiral dynamics, a meme is simply a basic stage of development that can be expressed in any activity. We will see many examples of this as we proceed. Beck and Cohen affirm that memes, or stages, are not rigid levels but flowing waves with much overlap and interweaving, resulting in a meshwork or dynamic spiral of consciousness unfolding. As Beck puts it, the spiral is messy, not symmetrical, with multiple admixtures rather than pure types. These are mosaics, meshes, and blends. Beck and Cohen use various names and colors to refer to these different memes or waves of existence. The use of colors almost always puts people off at first, but Beck and Cohen often work in racially charged areas, and they have found that it helps to take people's minds off of skin color and focus on the color of the meme instead of the color of the skin. Moreover, as much research has continued to confirm, each and every individual has all of these memes potentially available to them, and therefore the lines of social tension are completely redrawn. not based on skin color, economic class, or political clout, but on the type of meme a person is operating from. In a particular situation, it is no longer black versus white, but perhaps blue versus purple, or orange versus green, and so on. And while skin color cannot be changed, consciousness can. As Beck puts it, the focus is not on types of people, but types in people. The first 6 levels are subsistence levels, marked by first-tier thinking. Then there occurs a revolutionary shift in consciousness, the emergence of being levels, and second-tier thinking, of which there are 2 major waves. Here is a brief description of all 8 waves, the percentage of the world population at each wave, and the percentage of social power held by each. 1.
Remember, this is in the year 2000-ish.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's at
we
least
continue
20
to
years
move forward.
old.
Actually, he wrote this originally, I think in...
The late 90s, or?
Yeah.
You can probably find out at the beginning of the book.
Yeah, see what the copyright is.
It says 2000.
Okay, there we go.
All right, beige. Archaic, instinctual. The level of basic survival. Food, water, warmth, sex, and safety have priority. Uses habits and instincts just to survive. Distinct self is barely awakened or sustained. Forms into survival bands to perpetuate life. Where seen, first human societies, newborn infants, senile elderly, late-stage Alzheimer's victims, mentally ill street people, starving masses, shell shock, approximately 0.1% of the adult population, 0% power. 2. Purple, magical, animistic. Thinking is animistic. Magical spirits, good and bad, swarm the earth, leaving blessings, curses, and spells which determine events, forms into ethnic tribes. The spirits exist in ancestors and bond the tribe. Kinship and lineage establish political links. Sounds holistic, but is actually atomistic. There is a name for each bend in the river, but no name for the river. Where seen, belief in voodoo-like curses, blood oaths, ancient grudges, good luck charms, family rituals, magical ethnic beliefs and superstitions, strong in third world settings, gangs, athletic teams, and corporate tribes, 10% of the population, 1% of the power. 3. Red, power gods. First emergence of a self distinct from the tribe. Powerful, impulsive, egocentric, heroic. Magical mythic spirits, dragons, beasts, and powerful people. Archetypal gods and goddesses, powerful beings, forces to be reckoned with, both good and bad. Feudal lords protect underlings in exchange for obedience and labor. The basis of feudal empires, power and glory. The world is a jungle full of threats and predators. Conquers, outfoxes, and dominates. Enjoys self to the fullest without regret or remorse. Be here now. Where seen, the terrible twos. Rebellious youth, frontier mentalities, feudal kingdoms, epic heroes, James Bond villains, gang leaders, soldiers of fortune, New Age narcissism, wild rock stars, Attila the Hun, Lord of the Flies, 20% of the population, 5% of the power. 4. Blue, mythic order.
Can we...
Yeah. Do you want to talk about them?
I have a... I'll probably end up talking about this again if we keep going through this, but I remember, I was thinking about this the other day, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if I said anything about it, but there's an interesting pattern in these waves of worldview development and cultural development where there's kind of there's an oscillation between an individualist impulse and a collectivist impulse. So at beige, it's every man for himself.
Yeah.
Right? You're starving, you just you do what you gotta do, right?
Yeah.
So it's every man for himself. It's kind of individualist. It's
Yeah.
like if you can do something for me, then I might care about you. But basically, it's just
Right.
it's just me because
Yeah.
I need to like live.
Yeah.
Then you get to purple and it starts to become, oh wait, actually this is where the family lineages come in, right?
And
Like the old
tribes, a little bit.
kinship, right? Kinship
Yeah.
tribes.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden it's like, oh, actually if I stay close to the family and I stay with these other people, then we know we can trust each other.
Yeah.
And we like, it becomes like, it's all about the unit, the
Yeah.
family unit, the
Yeah.
cohesion of the group. And so you get like our tribe versus those tribe, that other tribe. And it's like, it's kind of us.
Yeah.
But then you get to red.
It's a
And
little
it
bit more
becomes-
self-centered.
Red becomes like it's power gods, right? So it's might.
Yeah.
It becomes a might makes right mentality, and you get warlords,
Yeah.
and you get the one guy who's in charge, and it's like if
Yeah.
you can be the most, right? It's very individualistic
Yeah.
again,
Gang leaders.
right?
Yeah.
It's about being the one guy,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's about being the biggest and the baddest,
Yeah.
right? And then you get to blue, and it becomes all which we're about to read about. But it goes back to a collectivist thing. It's like the one true. It's like we all agree on the one true God, or we
Yeah.
all agree on the glory of Rome.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so blue, mythic order. Life has meaning, direction, and purpose, with outcomes determined by an all-powerful other or order. This righteous order enforces a code of conduct based on absolutist and unvarying principles of right and wrong. Violating the code or rules has severe, perhaps everlasting repercussions. Following the code yields rewards for the faithful. Basis of ancient nations. Rigid social hierarchies, paternalistic, one right way and only one right way to think about everything, law and order, impulsivity controlled through guilt, concrete literal and fundamentalist belief, obedience to the rule of order, strongly conventional and conformist, often religious or mythic in the mythic membership sense. Graves and Beck refer to it as the saintly, absolutistic level, but can be secular or atheistic order or mission. Where seen, Puritan America, Confucian China, Dickensian England, Singapore discipline, totalitarianism, codes of chivalry and honor, charitable good deeds, religious fundamentalism, e.g. Christian and Islamic, Boy and Girl Scouts, moral majority, patriotism, 40% of the population, 30% of the power. 5. Orange, scientific achievement. At this wave, the self escapes from the herd mentality of blue.
Back to the individual.
No, yeah, exactly. Of blue and seeks truth and meaning in individualistic terms. Hypothetico-deductive, experimental, objective, mechanistic, operational, scientific in the typical sense. The world is a rational and well-oiled machine with natural laws that can be learned, mastered, and manipulated for one's own purposes. Highly achievement-oriented, especially in America, toward materialistic gains. The laws of science rule politics, the economy, and human events. The world is a chessboard on which games are played as winners gain preeminence and perks over losers. Marketplace alliances manipulate Earth's resources for one's strategic gains. Basis of corporate states. Where seen, the Enlightenment, Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, Wall Street, emerging middle classes around the world, cosmetics industry, trophy hunting, colonialism, the Cold War, fashion industry, materialism, secular humanism, liberal self-interest, and it comprises 30% of the population, 50% of the power. So that's interesting. 10% less of the population than blue,
Come on.
but
More of the power.
More of the power.
Yeah, well, they're
Blue?
wealthier,
Yeah.
right? And
Maybe smarter. I don't know.
maybe, but like certainly more effective.
That makes sense. Green, the sensitive self. Communitarian, so back to the herd.
Yeah.
Human bonding, ecological sensitivity, networking, The human spirit must be freed from greed, dogma, and divisiveness. Feelings and caring supersede cold rationality. Cherishing of the earth, Gaia, life, against hierarchy, establishes lateral bonding and linking, permeable self, relational self, group intermeshing, emphasis on dialogue, relationships, basis of value communities, i.e., freely chosen affiliations based on shared sentiments, reaches decisions through reconciliation and consensus, downside, interminable processing and incapacity to reach decisions, refresh spirituality, bring harmony, enrich human potential, strongly egalitarian, anti-hierarchy, pluralistic values, social construction of reality, diversity, multiculturalism, relativistic value systems. This worldview is often called pluralistic relativism. Subjective, nonlinear thinking shows a greater degree of effective warmth, sensitivity, and caring for Earth and all its inhabitants. Where seen, deep ecology, postmodernism, Netherlands idealism, Rogerian counseling, Canadian healthcare, humanistic psychology, liberation theology, cooperative inquiry, World Council of Churches, Greenpeace, animal rights, ecofeminism, post-colonialism, Foucault, Derrida, politically correct, diversity movements, human rights issues, eco-psychology. 10% of the population, 15% of the power.
Now
Now these numbers might be totally different at this
that's
point.
what I'm saying. I think it's continued to slide, and there's fewer. I think actually what's happened is there's fewer people in blue. There's more people in orange and more people in green.
For sure. I bet it's a lot more of the power by now. I don't know.
Can I have a thing? Because
Yeah.
he's got a little eye booger.
Yeah.
Morphe, do you want to come up here?
With the completion of the green meme, human consciousness is poised for a quantum jump into second-tier thinking. Claire Graves referred to this as a momentous leap, where a chasm of unbelievable depth of meaning is crossed. In essence, with second-tier consciousness, one can think both vertically and horizontally, using both hierarchies and heterarchies, both ranking and linking. Come on.
Yeah. You're the boy.
Where am I? One can therefore, for the first time, vividly grasp the entire spectrum of interior development, and thus see that each level, each meme, each wave is crucially important for the health of the overall spiral.
Yep.
As I would word it, each wave is transcend and include. That is, each wave goes beyond or transcends its predecessor, and yet it includes or embraces it in its own makeup. If it, I may not think it actually embraces.
No, functionally it does.
Okay.
Like in order to actually be in the green meme,
Yeah.
you have to understand like the scientific method.
Yeah.
You can't get to the postmodern
You had to have
worldview
gone through
without having kind of like you can steal those words
Yeah.
and say deconstructed, blah blah blah, decolonialized, and just like throw out these buzzwords.
Yeah.
But if you have an actual understanding, you can't be at postmodern without an actual understanding, or without the ability to think in a modernist, rational way.
Yeah.
You have to be able to like actually look at the world in terms of, to say you have to look at the world in terms of science is kind of a weird thing to say, because it's like you have to understand the scientific method. You know what I mean? You have to understand reason, logic, these kinds of things
Yeah.
to be actually at a postmodern perspective, because you can't actually deconstruct what you don't understand. And postmodernism does attempt to actually deconstruct
Modernism.
modernism. So you can't functionally be postmodern or at the Green without actually having gone
Having
through.
at least dipped
right?
your toes
Right.
through.
Now
each
this
of
is a
the
problem. He
levels.
talks about this a little bit. The
Yeah.
red underbelly of Green,
Mhm.
and in how even in the '60s there were. I say this all the time, but even in the
Yeah.
'60s there were very few people who were marching in the streets who were really like anti-war because they actually cared.
Because they were actually world-centric.
Right, and they cared
And
about the Vietnamese people
yeah.
who were dying or anything like
But
this.
more likely they
More-
didn't want to go
They were
to war.
anti-draft.
Yeah.
And they were like, you can't tell me what to do.
Right.
And so, yeah, like they were,
Glommed on with the...
they
green
took
movers.
they took the sophisticated arguments of the Green meme, kind
and
of
made them their own.
distilled them down into a slogan and basically said, fuck you.
Okay. So, that is, each wave goes beyond or transcends its predecessor, and yet it includes or embraces it in its own makeup. For example, a cell transcends but includes molecules, which transcend but include atoms. To say that a molecule goes beyond an atom is not to say that molecules hate atoms, but that they love them. They embrace them in their own makeup. They include them. They don't marginalize them. All right, Ken. Just so, each wave of existence is a fundamental ingredient of all subsequent waves, and thus each is to be cherished and embraced. Moreover, each wave can itself be activated or reactivated as life circumstances warrant. In emergency situations, we can activate red power drives. In response to chaos, we might need to activate blue order. In looking for a new job, we might need orange achievement drives. In marriage and with friends, close green bonding. All of these memes have something important to contribute. But what none of the first tier memes can do on their own is fully appreciate the existence of the other memes. Each of the first tier memes thinks that its worldview is the correct or best perspective. It reacts negatively if challenged. It lashes out, using its own tools whenever it is threatened. Blue order is very uncomfortable with both red impulsiveness and orange individualism. Orange individualism thinks blue order is for suckers, and green egalitarianism is weak and woo-woo. Green egalitarianism cannot easily abide excellence and value rankings, big pictures, hierarchies, or anything that appears authoritarian, and thus green reacts strongly to blue, orange, and anything post-green. All of that begins to change with second-tier thinking, because second-tier consciousness is fully aware of the interior stages of development, even if it cannot articulate them in a technical fashion. It steps back and grasps the big picture, and thus second-tier thinking appreciates the necessary role that all of the various memes play. Second-tier awareness thinks in terms of the overall spiral of existence, and not merely in the terms of any one level. Where the green meme begins to grasp the numerous different systems and pluralistic contexts that exist in different cultures, which is why it is indeed the sensitive self, i.e. sensitive to the marginalization of others, second-tier thinking goes one step further. It looks for the rich contexts that link and join these pluralistic systems, and thus it takes these separate systems and begins to embrace, include, and integrate them into holistic spirals and integral meshworks. Second-tier thinking, in other words, is instrumental in moving from relativism to holism, or from pluralism to integralism. The extensive research of Graves, Beck, and Cohen indicates that there are at least two major waves to this second-tier integral consciousness. Yellow, integrative. Life is a kaleidoscope of natural hierarchies, holarchies, in kind of brackets, systems and forms. Flexibility, spontaneity, and functionality have the highest priority. Differences and pluralities can be integrated into interdependent natural flows. Egalitarianism is complemented with natural degrees of ranking and excellence. I think our batteries are going out on the
smoke detector.
It's okay, boo. Knowledge and competency should supersede power, status, or group sensitivity. I know, that's kind of loud and crazy, isn't it? The prevailing world order is the result. Let's see. The prevailing world order is the result of the existence of different levels of reality, memes, and the inevitable patterns of movement up and down the dynamic spiral.
Hold on a second, because he's getting all freaked out.
It's alright, Bubba.
Oh, don't worry about it, Mama. Hey.
You got sharp nails,
down.
boo.
Go on, lay down.
Coming or going?
All right. Good boy.
Okay, so yeah. Knowledge and competency should supersede power, status, or group sensitivity. The prevailing world order is the result of the existence of different levels of reality, memes, and the inevitable patterns of movement up and down the dynamic spiral. Good governance facilitates the emergence of entities through the levels of increasing complexity, nested hierarchy. 1% of the population, 5% of the power. Turquoise, 8. Holistic. Universal holistic system, holon/waves of integrative energies. Unites feeling with knowledge. Multiple levels interwoven into one conscious system. Universal order, but in a living conscious fashion, not based on external rules, blue, or group bonds, green. A grand unification, TOE, is possible in theory and in actuality. It's okay. It's okay.
Go. Get out of here.
It's just got such a high-pitched noise.
Come on, you. Come here.
Go with Papa. I think...
Maybe it's about to stop, huh?
What?
Maybe we should stop for now.
Okay, well, can I finish reading about turquoise?
Not with him making all this noise, you can't.
Mm.
That's not gonna, I mean, I don't have a battery to replace it with, so,
Okay.
or I don't see one.
Alright. We'll finish reading in a bit, I guess.